Hello, I'm Joseph Dillard. Welcome to the IDL video curricula. While integral deep listening advocates the use of pranayama during yoga and meditation, waking mundane activities, dreaming, and even deep sleep, it does not emphasize using pranayama in some of the ways that traditional Hindu-based pranayama does. For instance, to condition the body either as preparation for yoga or meditation or for raising kundalini. It does not emphasize either breath holding or spinal alignment exercises. IDL generally encourages awareness of two parts of each inhalation and exhalation, instead of three, as some traditional approaches to pranayama do. Because the goal of IDL pranayama is not primarily a full breath, but an aware breath. However, if students of integral deep listening want to add a third component to inhalation and exhalation, or combine it with any of the practices from the Hindu tradition mentioned above, there is no reason why they cannot. Essential goals of traditional pranayama include control, purification, transcendence, freedom from suffering, and unification with the immortal self, Atman. While integral deep listening also uses breath to achieve transcendence and freedom from suffering, it diverges from yoga in other important areas. It views self-development, including self-realization or realization of self as Atman, Brahman, or God, as components of personal stages of development rather than transpersonal. This is because these approaches assume true identity as a self. Transpersonal development stages involve the dissolution of identification with all definitions of self, including soul, the superconscious, and Atman. This is not simply a linguistic distinction that is irrelevant in the context of the oneness of mystical ecstasy. Words, concepts, and thoughts determine what we see, what we look for, what is figure, and what is ground in our experience. Concepts determine how we interpret and translate what we experience during mystical experiences. Therefore, words, concepts, and thoughts matter if we have any interest at all at bringing fire from heaven and converting it into some useful and understandable form. In fact, I've written a book about this subject. It's about words and concepts that are and are not conducive to enlightenment. The dissolution of identification with all definitions of self happens normally as you identify with emerging potentials accessed through IDL interviewing, because awareness naturally expands without manipulation or control and becomes multi-perspectival. Instead of having one set, stable identity, you have many that flow into one another. Your attachments or preferences for this or that identity become arbitrary because no underlying identity ultimately and unconditionally defines you. This can be seen in the interview with breath that I have included in the appendices of my book on IDL Pranayama. Breath in that interview is found to be fundamentally selfless, possessing a consciousness that clearly transcends and includes that of waking identity. You're strongly encouraged to do your own interview with breath using the life issue interviewing protocol found also in the appendices of the previously mentioned book, but also to be found at integraldeeplistening.com under questionnaires, and see what conclusions hold true for you. The second area in which IDL diverges from traditional yoga in its use of pranayama involves control. IDL pranayama seeks a middle path between control and vipassana, or Buddhist mindfulness of breath. The first yogic approach emphasizes will, concentration, and control, while the second emphasizes bare observation. IDL pranayama attempts to make use of both without placing undue or primary emphasis on either. IDL does not teach, nor does it encourage breath control, because its approach to expanding awareness is not based on control, nor are stilling the mind or accessing higher states of consciousness priorities for IDL, as they are for traditional pranayama. Instead, it teaches access to perspectives that include a still mind as a natural byproduct and evolution into higher developmental stages that successively include yet transcend previous ones. This is a very different proposition from accessing higher states of consciousness, because states are not stages of development, and stages of development are not states. States are temporary, by definition. Stages are permanent. States can be intense, ecstatic, and transformational, but they rarely lead to a lasting advance in developmental stage. This is because there is considerable inertia in habitual thinking, feeling, behavior, in addition to considerable social pressures to maintain the status quo. That's familial socio-cultural scripting. Therefore, seeking transformational states is not a priority for IDL, although it does access these in the interviewing process from time to time. While IDL encourages practice, discipline, and concentration, all of which involve control, it also encourages giving up control in at least 3 different ways. The first is in the cultivation of the witness, which is a mindfulness practice that practitioners of Vipassana could relate to. The second is an emphasis on cultivation of a non-dual consciousness, which has nothing to do with control. The third is in deference to the priorities of interviewed emerging potentials. When we do so, the goals and will of a waking identity and authoritative external sources, such as scriptures or a guru, are not used to direct growth as they are in traditional yoga. The priorities of interviewed emerging potentials are given control on a provisional and experimental temporary basis, with the results submitted to triangulation, that is, to the input of authority, other trusted interviewed perspectives, and your own common sense. Concentration is supplemented with receptive mindfulness, and discipline is supplemented with cosmic humor. Control, then, is accomplished in IDL through its transcendence and inclusion in a greater whole that serves a greater purpose. The third area of divergence from traditional yoga involves purification, which Hindu yogas emphasize as a prerequisite for enlightenment in many different ways. These commonly include the system of the 3 gunas: adherence to one's karmic path, subjection to dharma, and asceticism. IDL does not lay down guidelines for purification, but instead recommends that you listen to and experiment with following those recommendations provided by interviewed emerging potentials that make sense to you. The result will be purification, but it is likely to be experienced or pursued as such. The entire video curricula can be found at integraldeeplistening.com, and thanks for watching. See you next time.